warmly welcome everybody to this last session of Viikki Sustainability Research Seminar of this 2021. And we have a super interesting topic today with three really great presentations, each focusing on different perspectives on today's topic, risk analysis and sustainability. And Saara Varis from HELSUS is recording this session, and it will become available later on in HELSUS website as well if you have to leave earlier, so just to let you know. And I am a chair of the meeting today. My name is Anne Toppinen. I represent HELSUS as one of the organizers of this event series. As the first presenter, we have here research professor Paula Kivimaa. Welcome, Paula. You can start uploading your presentation, but meanwhile, I'd like to say a couple of words about your background. So Paula comes from SYKE, where she is a professor in climate and society, and also associated with the University of Sussex. Paula is also a member of Finnish climate panel, and she was quite recently also nominated as being one of the most highly cited researchers in social sciences in Finland. So congrats, Paula, on that as well. Probably I will not use any more of the time for presentations, but you can find the abstract and bio also on HELSUS website. So please, Paula, floor is yours, and please try to keep the timetable.
Yes, thank you very much. So it's interesting to participate in this sort of multidisciplinary approach to talking about risk. My presentation is in the context of low carbon energy transitions and particularly looking at negative and positive security implications that the transitions may create. And it's based on an Academy of Finland fellowship project where the idea is to look at the connections also between government policies on energy and national security, but this is more focused on kind of future expectations around security that are unfolding. I appreciate that we are people, or the audience comes from different disciplines, so I sort of start up by explaining what I mean by sustainable energy transitions. So I'm involved in, or I'm a scholar in the field of sustainability transitions, which is a social science research field that looks at how systemic and disruptive changes in socio-technical systems towards environmental sustainability happen. And this research originated about 20 years ago, and it's been mainly focused on environmental sustainability, but lately also questions of social sustainability have been added. And the key point about this area of research that we're not only looking at how technologies change, but how institutions and actor relations that have been built around these sort of socio-technical systems and the technologies used are changing too, or should be changing, and the sort of various practices that we as people or organizations take, and how they tend to be relatively stable as they have gradually built around these sort of established socio-technical systems, and therefore transitions can be tricky. When I'm talking about energy transitions in this context, there's a lot of kind of changes happening. So it's about increases in variable renewable energy, energy storage, smart homes, digitalization, so many technological changes. It's also connected to electrification of heating and transport and increasing international grid connections between countries. And everyone's probably also aware of the plans to phase out coal and other fossil fuels. There's also somewhat connected, even though this can be done in a centralized manner, is the potential increasing decentralization of energy system and increasing prosumers, which also links this to these sort of questions on energy justice and democracy. So this is sort of a summary of what energy transitions are about. And why I got interested in the security theme was that the sustainability transitions research has paid very little attention to security. There have been some passing remarks how geopolitical security and energy security are important contextual threats. In one piece of work, there's a colleague, Phil Johnston, who's been interested in the military sector, particularly connected to nuclear power in sustainability transitions, and there have been some other remarks on military and geopolitical considerations of nuclear reactors, but apart from that, this whole literature field does not address security. In this presentation, I cover this question: what kind of positive and negative security issues are associated with the unfolding zero-carbon energy transition? And when I talk about security, I need to define it. So, and this is sort of an evolving concept for me as well, but we can take a starting point and definition by Baldwin that security means a low probability of potential harm or the preservation of acquired values such as territorial integrity, human survival, or sustainability. The interesting thing in the security studies is that while it has started off with this idea of protection of state, it is really covering not only kind of military related threats, but also environmental, health, and technology. And when I talk about negative security, I'm referring to this idea of looking at security from something or the absence of a threat, whereas positive security also connects to kind of enabling conditions that further human well-being. So in this short presentation, I'm kind of trying to cover ideas from two different papers. One is an integrated literature review, really looking at the global setting and how literature presents it. And another one is empirical research we've carried out in this project, looking at 60 expert interviews in 4 countries, Estonia, Finland, Norway, and Scotland, and also trying to separate a little bit on the security implications of fossil fuel phase out on the other hand, and renewables acceleration on the other. So just like jumping into straight to our sort of initial conclusions, this is an unpublished paper under review, resubmitted. Some of the key negative security implications on a global scale, we've divided these into categories of technology-related, actor-related, and institutional-related issues. So if we look at technology, renewable energy-based and electrification are creating new dependencies on critical materials. There's an increased risk of cyber attacks, as well as systems becoming more connected via electricity. There can be adverse impacts to other systems, such as water and food security. In terms of actors, some of the key elements are uncertain reactions, how the present hydrocarbon producing states will react to these changes, and there are risks of global instability as well as internal conflicts within these countries. Another interesting aspect is China's dominance over critical material supply. China is currently producing, I think, about 90% of the critical materials we use in Europe. And there's also a connected issue of risk of disruption from right-wing populists that are kind of opposing the energy transition. Institutionally, these are of course connected. Some of the existing problems may merely be shifting from hydrocarbon system to critical material system, which we need to be aware of and try to somehow address. In Africa in particular, there could be results of unintended strengthening of undemocratic institutions and criminal and armed groups linked to these critical materials. And in India, for example, new land use related conflicts around renewable energy. However, if we look at positive security, we can equally find issues. So for technology, it's clear that we have more different types of energy resources available, and we can reduce the system's reliance on fossil fuels. International grid communities in electricity production are emerging, and they reduce the need for reserve capacity. And there can also be, when the systems decentralize, the magnitude of impact from whether it's a weather or sort of a cyber attack, there's a reduced magnitude of impact from these disruptions. In terms of actors, it can be seen as positive that there's a breakthrough reliance of states on hydrocarbon producing states, and other states are emerging as new energy exporters. This also connects to improved climate security, as well as potentially more diffuse power and energy democracy when decentralized consumer-based and community-based systems become more common. Institutionally, it has been noted that energy transitions may improve peace building in foreign policy with the help of renewable energy and reduce structural violence by empowering communities as well as supporting new climate institutions. So then I'm jumping into our interviews. So a lot of the same themes actually came in the interviews, even though it was more focused on the 4 countries. And we divided these kind of themes under 8 categories. So energy security and electricity system operation, as well as connections to cybersecurity. A particular question for Finland and Estonia has been the connections between wind power and defense. Then the questions of geopolitics and internal stability, as well as climate security and the Arctic. And of course, I don't have time to go through, but I'm showing a few examples from the interview results. So when we look at the wind power question, there's clearly the issue of how higher and newer wind turbines influence the operation of air surveillance, radars and signal intelligence near the Russian border. And this is a question for both Finland and Estonia. And it has caused disagreement between the defense and energy administrations, but the positive side is that there have been solutions already developed to this question via networking between the actors involved, as well as the national grid operators, as well as sort of learning that via new types of radar equipment this can be solved, but also kind of creating administrative solutions on who pays for this is an issue, and this is kind of an ongoing issue, even though it is partially resolved. Another question which I'm especially interested in is the internal stability and how big a risk this is or is not in the sort of Western world. 19 interviews identified the sort of risk of regional or national conflicts around the energy transition. And of course, the biggest one is that there could be tensions and fear of unrest created between livelihoods based on fossil fuel production and climate change goals. In Estonia, in particular, oil shale production is concentrated in the Ida-Virumaa region, where the oil shale phase-out risks causing more unemployment and economic hardship in an area that's already not doing that well, and Russia potentially aiming to stir up dissatisfaction and instability among the local population. This is one of the key questions in Estonia. In other countries, there's also a risk of political instability. So we do see some far-right populists working to save fossil fuels and oppose climate change, as well as nationalist ideas leading to overcapacity in electricity production, sort of aiming that we need to have some sort of energy autonomy. And these forces then are countering the citizen protests for climate change. So this could be a potential future risk. So just to sum up quickly, what we can see from this is that the security implication comprise both the sort of technological system related as well as social aspects, and they are intertwined with actions of different state and non-state actors. The expectations are polarized, so some people see more and other people see less secure future energy systems. And these security issues also connect to learning processes, how large how we're dependent on, for example, large universities or global companies and militaries in generating new R&D and in the complex technological systems. And then also like the actor networks they're here on a quite macro level focused on states that form geopolitical or collaborative alliances, as well as relationship between national energy and security administrations. I'm not going to go through this figure, but from the results, we have this figure how we're now living in this hybrid between all and these systems, which are influenced by these expectations, actor networks, and learning, as well as this evolving landscape of different types of security challenges. So just to conclude, when transitions unfold, they can significantly affect the socio-technical landscape beyond the energy sector, and one aspect is this security. So for example, when the scaling innovations link to how perceptions and actions of globally powerful actors develop, and also policymakers should pay attention to these learning dynamics around the formation of security implications. And they also consider how learning and new energy networks might influence the reaction of powerful hydrocarbon exporters. So somehow including these states rather than excluding is likely to improve global stability. And also that some of the negative security implications can be alleviated with attention to social justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. For those that also joined us a bit later, we have this tradition of having three really concise presentations, and afterwards there's more time. But even now there is probably time for one question. If somebody is really quick, raise your hand. Or if you did not come up with a question yet, you can also type some questions targeted to Paula during the following presentations as well, and we can come back to those later. I at least don't see any questions in the chat, so then I take the chair's obligation of always having to ask something. You had very many insights there, but I was just thinking that the current months we have seen the increasing energy prices here in Europe. So how have you been kind of reflecting on that regarding your results? Is there anything that picks your attention in particular?
Yeah, I think it really just sort of highlights how this whole transition and the policy actions we take is also connected to this sort of idea of just transitions. So initially when we started the project, we're kind of more focused on security, but how they're really on both on a kind of individual society, country level, as well as if we look at the international community and how those who are suffering, even if they might have said that, okay, you have been polluting in the past, but if we don't kind of take some sort of approach to help and also compensate those that are suffering, it's probably going to increase different types of security conflicts. So maybe that's the key really for me.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to move on to the second presentation, but as said, if you come up with some questions specifically targeted either to Paula or the following two presentations, feel free to put them in chat or raise your hand after the presentation. And after all three, we should be having some more time for also joint discussion. So next we go to forests, and we have research manager Markus Melin coming from SYKE and talking about especially the insect outbreaks and practical examples from research perspectives. And Markus has a background in forest sciences, but also in wildlife ecology. And yeah, just looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Yes,
so let's hope everything goes fine in terms of technicalities.
We shall see how it goes. So to the first question, yes, I'm actually holding my mobile phone. My computer does not allow me to attend Zoom meetings, even from the browser, which is a new tightening to look at policies regarding IT safety. So here we are. I got my presentation on my mobile phone. Let's see, can I share it? So I have to turn off my video, my selfie screen now, and let's see how the sharing works from this device. If it doesn't work, oh, only the host can share in this meeting. So I guess somebody have to make me a host.
Can you, Sarah?
Yes, just a moment.
No worry. Just a moment is the theme of my day today. I'm the co-host. I can now share.
Great.
Let's see, I can share my screen. I'm going to share you my screen, and then I'm going to turn to the... Well, while I wait, I can start my presentation. So yes, I work at SYKE, and my current research interests are in studying dynamics of pest insect outbreaks in forests. And oh, please work.
If it does not look promising, we can also investigate the plan B and Sarah sharing your slides.
Oh, we are getting there. Okay. Let's do one more test, and then we'll give up if it doesn't work. So now you should see my screen. Oh. Okay, Sarah, if you have the presentation, Turn it on. This is getting more complex than.
I'll do it.
If there are any SYKE researchers on the lines.
We can sympathize with these things, but now Sarah is sharing the screen, so please go ahead. We can't hear you, Markus. Did you lose the connection? Okay, we should let Markus in. He went back to the waiting room. Hello, Markus, are you back?
All right, am I back online?
Yes, please. And we can see your presentation.
Excellent. So now I can see it myself as well. Let all the students out there take this as a lesson. There's nothing more uncertain than IT systems, especially when you really, really need them. With that being said, let's kick this show on. Sarah, I'll say your name or I'll say click and then just click. Go on. So those are the themes of today. On the right-hand side, you will see a handful of spruce bark beetles, a few non-moths. On the top right corner of the top, you can see damage by Iptographus, and on the bottom, you will see some beautiful mixed forests. Forests that we are thinking should be better against the insect damage by, let's say, the spruce bark beetle or the non-moth. And there are a couple of very alarming trends happening now in our climate as well as in our forest, which is why this theme is highly topical. So let's go to the next slide and see about those trends that I was talking about. Trend number one, click on. That is what has happened to the Finnish average annual temperature, the mean temperature from the 1850 up until 2015. On the left-hand picture, you will see a nice steady rise. On the right-hand side, you will see a prediction of where we are going depending on how much pollution we keep on shooting up the atmosphere. Regardless of the RCP scenario, the figures show you that, let's say until 2050, 2060, it is going to get warmer and warmer. One more click, Sarah. And if you consider forest, the annual mean temperature doesn't really matter. What matters is that hot and dry summers are becoming more and more likely, more probable to happen. And the whole growing season is getting longer. That means that the springs and the autumns are warmer than they were 50, 100, let alone 200 years ago. And those are very, very important stuff. I'll return to them in a few more slides. Sarah, click on. Again. That is another trend that is going on in our forest. Previously, you saw a trend in the climate, but that is what has happened to our forest regeneration, especially in the south. Spruce is being favored and pine less so. The figures come from the National Forest Inventory. You will see the area of pine-dominated seedling stands in different NFIs from the 1980s up until 2017. That trend is so linear that it is as if somebody made it actually up. One click. The big issue is that this sprucification, as I call it, it happens in the southern Finland where it really, really ought not to happen, especially if you ask the two pest insects that I was talking about, or the warming summers. In the next slide, I will open up this trend a bit more, or the fact that why we should be worried about it. Go ahead, Sarah. Again, so the spruce itself suffers. You can click. It suffers because it doesn't really tolerate the droughts. Another click. It is very, let's say, ill-equipped against winds, especially since the autumns are warmer. There is no frost on the ground, so the spruces are falling down more easily than they did a century ago, resulting in what you see below. Now, why is this important? Well, how about the spruce bark beetle? Click. that species is really benefiting with the warming. The warming aids the species in many ways. If the spring is warmer, it can start to reproduce earlier. And those kind of trees you see that are knocked down by the wind or that are suffering from heat stress, they offer plenty of material where to breed in. The species is using those weak spruce trees to breed, meaning that their population can grow and it can become more abundant. One more click, please. If you think about the spruce bark beetle, in Central Europe, they are so abundant that they can actually kill healthy trees pretty much on their own. But here in Finland, the wind damage is still the main driver of bark beetle damage in Finland. So first you have the storm that knocks down the trees, and then the bark beetles can breed in those fallen trees. And then they can attack the neighboring forest because of their increased numbers. So that is why there is this nasty cycle here. It is getting warmer. The beetle benefits, the spruce gets weaker, the wind comes, knocks down the spruce, so the beetles can benefit from that one. It is a very nasty cycle and we are quite worried. If we take a look at a few graphs here, we can really show the evidence. This is from Central Europe. Amount of wood harvested because of the spruce bark beetle damages in different European countries from the 1980s up until 2017. So the trend is quite clear, especially in the past decade, the amount of damages has just gone on catastrophic levels. What has happened in Finland? We don't know the exact statistic on harvesting, but after a few clicks, we can see some trends. That is the area of Ips typographus damage according to the National Forest Inventory. So the past 10 years has seen a slow and steady rise in the amount of Ips typographus damages. The risk areas in the next map show that southern Finland, especially southeast, it is kind of the epicenter of Finland's spruce bark beetle damages. That is why I was so worried about the sprucification happening in southern Finland, because that is also where the bark beetles are doing the most damage at the moment. Now, next slide. Is there anything to do? Well, there's a lot of talk about mixed forests being the solution to many troubles. And actually they could be, especially when it comes to bark beetles or insects. One more click. Those images tell you a lot. Both of those forests have been attacked by bark beetles killing spruce. On the top, you see a forest in Germany, totally destroyed by the spruce bark beetle. In below, you see a forest in Northern America, attacked by the spruce beetle. In the image below, the forest is actually still surviving because there are other tree species than just the spruce. In the top image, there's nothing there. The forest was made of only spruce, and now all the spruce are dead. So you don't have to be a genius to guess which of these forest ecosystems is now more healthy, more resilient, or actually a forest ecosystem. A click, please. This quote comes from Thomas Lasny from Czechia, one of the leading researchers of bark beetles in Europe. Czech Republic is now kind of suffering the most with the bark beetle damages, and what they have said is that the most undesired outcome, given the current damage situation, would be the emergence of a new, even-aged forest cohort dominated by spruce. Basically, the age of single-species spruce forests are over. They just have no chances of surviving, given how warm it is and given how many bark beetles there are. Same for Poland. Another click, another quote by a famous researcher. There are a lot of damages in the Bielawieza forest, and they have learned that the young mixed forest stands have been least affected. Another click. And the presence of other tree species in any stand has decreased the overall mortality. Click on. And the most intense damage have been recorded in old, pure single species spruce stands. The nutshell of all of this is that, one more click, even the spruce itself is more likely to survive in a mixed forests. And southern Finland, the sprucification that I was talking about, it is now happening in seedling stands. And in many seedling stands, you have birch species surrounding them. They will give their seeds there, and you have a lot of birch saplings coming up. This kind of suggests that you really should think about developing these forests into mixed forests. Also, spruce is quite important species for our economy as well. So even if you don't care about forest health, this will hit your wallet if you're investing in pure spruce forests and thinking that you're going to be okay. All right, this goes on quite smoothly. Thank you, Sarah. We can go to the next slide. Something else to consider. I always think concrete examples are something people will remember. So Sweden, that's something. It's very close to us. Well, I'm in Joensuu, not close to me, but it's close to Helsinki. The spruce bark beetle damages in southern Sweden alone, so just the tip of southern Sweden, click on. In last year, or 2 years ago, about 7 million cubic meters, and in last year, when we click, over 8 million cubic meters. In Finland, our total damages have not been estimated, but we are talking about just tens of thousands of cubic meters, not even hundreds of thousands. So Sweden is really in a league of its own, and it is just that close to us. Another very good example for those who are about forest policy and law, click on. The Czech Republic, they have actually resorted to legislation to halt or to control the bark beetle damages. A few more clicks as we go. They have made rules that the use of spruce is not allowed in the most risk-prone areas, so you just can't plant the spruce there. Quite a tough action. Also, subsidies are being paid to the planting of non-spruce species, especially on those areas that have been cleared because of the bark beetle damages. So these are concrete actions. Also, click there, and the maximum proportions of spruce have been defined for each area. So if you are in this part of the Czech Republic, you cannot plant more than this or this much. The actual idea of this is basically to promote what I would say quite natural forestry, in the sense that you're planting a tree species that would be most natural in this site. That would probably occur there also even without the effect of human. So basically these kind of legislation rules are preventing the forest owner from doing stupid things such as planting spruce to places where it doesn't belong. Now you might ask, why did this happen in the first place? Why is Finland getting sprucified? That is because of the price. Spruce is usually, you get more money by selling spruce than birch, and also it grows faster than pine. So there is this temptation to put in spruce because you're hoping it to give you more profits in the future. However, if you plant a spruce now, it'll be a forest in the next 80 years. So thinking about the climate change, thinking about the bark beetles, you might have to recalculate your profits. Now let's go to the next slide. I had a non-moth, keep on clicking, in my opening slide, so we have to touch that one too. Non-moth monitoring has been active in SYKE since 2018. And what have we learned so far? That is the species, and that is a picture of our pheromone trap. First, we have learned that it is really surprisingly abundant in Finland, and keep on clicking. It is a moth, as you can see, a beautiful moth, whose caterpillars eat pine and spruce needles, so both species are favored. It is not a pest, at least not for now, but we are studying it because it could be. And a few more pictures. That is the number of non-moth observations in laji.fi, the Finnish biodiversity facility, and that is if you show it in a map. The species has really gone up if we are talking about north-south direction, and it has also become more abundant. So we saw this trend and we decided that, okay, let's put our eyes on the species. Let's see, could it develop into a pest here? It is not a pest now, but if it would be, then the spruce would again suffer. So first, some examples about what the non-moth has done in the past and how these relate to mixed or single species spruce forests. One more click. And with those examples, the non-moth really shows us why you should avoid growing trees in the wrong sites and why you should avoid in planting only one single species. So non-moth examples from across Central and Eastern Europe. First click, please. Brinkkiova and Nakladal, they did a big review on the Czech Republic's non-moth damages over 250 years period. And what did they find out? Now you can click as I speak. First, they found that the larvae were feeding on 22 species of trees and shrubs. However, most of the damage, 90% of the damage, occurred in coniferous forests, and over 70% of those occurred in spruce forests. So another ring in the bell. Mixed forests were only attacked seriously during massive outbreaks. So on a regular day, they didn't cause any troubles in the mixed forests. They were preferring the spruce-dominated forests. Remember that one. Same happened in Poland. They had a massive outbreak just some 40 years ago. And what did they find out over there? Damages happened in nearly 2 million hectares of pine, spruce, and larch forests. However, the highest mortality was in spruce-dominated forests on dry or barren site types, so in places where you actually should never put spruce to begin with. Clear lesson. In Denmark, the 1980s saw many minor outbreaks from 10 to 1,000 hectares. They would have been bigger, but the Danes put a lot of poison in the air and killed the larvae. Of course, they killed dozens of other species as well, so it wasn't a wise decision. Yet the damages happened. The damages happened in forests of Scots pine, lodgepole pine, and Sitka spruce, but again, the worst damage were recorded in single species Norway spruce stands. And Norway spruce is what we are seeing in Finland all the time. So quite nasty trends, I would say. A click. This is a wrap up. If you must remember just one slide, of course, you might remember this whole cell phone based presentation, but I think me and Sara are doing fantastic cooperation over here. Click on, Sara. The big issues that we are seeing now are sprucification, and especially in the wrong site type under the current climate. Remember, the spruce does not stand the drying or the heating, even without the pest insects. However, what we also see is that the insect pests of spruce are benefiting, so they are growing and becoming more severe under the current climate. Click. Mixed forests, definitely the big issue, and this is for forest health, but also for the spruce itself. So if you are planting a forest and you want to make sure that it grows up so that your grandkids can see it, it better has to be a mixed forest, especially if spruce is concerned. And next, what is in? Given all of this, what I taught, well, being prepared is actually quite in, and looking into the future, we are still quite up north. So our bark beetle levels are nowhere near to what they are in Central and Eastern Europe, meaning that we can do some changes. One more click. The sprucification concerns seedling stands, and this is what I said already. You are seeing now more and more spruce seedling stands, and they are, well, they are mature in 40 years' time, so there's a lot of time to allow those deciduous trees to come in and make your changes so that the forest is becoming more mixed than single species. Right, go on. Our institute, SYKE, is actually starting to work on a preparedness plan against big spruce bark beetle epidemics. If those kind of epidemics that they have in Central and Eastern Europe would actually hit our country, that would affect the local economy, the local businesses, the whole wood logistics. It would affect the factories and a lot of stuff that we can't really know what would happen. But the countries in the south have given us good examples. So we're trying to learn from their mistakes and their lessons. Click on. So my final quote, monitoring of forests, their pests and diseases is continuing, and I guess it must continue given that the climate is changing no matter what we do about it. Now I have just 2 slides left, and the next one shows you the references. So everything that I was discussing is based on actual research. You can find them. They should be open access. If not, send me an email and I'll share the articles. And the final slide is the best one. I mentioned that I'm from Joensuu, so that's greeting from my home region. I can't put on my camera because I'm actually afraid the mobile signal will cut me off and throw me out of the meeting. That has happened so many times already. I'm not going to take my chances, but if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them via my microphone.
Okay, thank you, Markus, and I hope this was not too traumatizing effect to join Viikki Sustainability seminar. Since the clicking took a bit longer time than was normally, let's do it so that we take Helmi's presentation first, and then we will focus on the questions. And there's already in chat one question targeted to you. I wonder you can access chat. So meanwhile, so Helmi, are you somewhere there? Hopefully. Yeah. And Markus mentioned the word preparedness, and your topic is very much focusing on the pandemic preparedness, the root cause why we are meeting online instead of here in Viikki campus. And just a couple of words about Helmi Räisänen. You are a PhD student in environmental policy in Janne Hukkinen's research group, I believe, and your thesis topic is exactly focusing on these questions on how to handle the preparedness and the future looming pandemics as well. Please, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. I assume you can see my slides and hear me well, right?
Yes, both.
Okay. Actually, I'll just skip the. Well, I'll turn off my camera for the presentation and then I'll turn it on for the discussion just in case. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me here. So yes, I'm Helmi Räisänen and I'm a social and cultural anthropologist and I'm associated with HELSUS. And today, well, the clicking isn't working here so smoothly. Now, yes. Today, I'm talking to you about my ongoing research on pandemic preparedness among the infectious disease experts in the National Institute for Health and Welfare. So I did a few interviews with the experts from the Health Ministry too, but I'm certainly focusing on THL where I did my fieldwork. I started this research actually in 2017 when I analyzed how the experts conceptualize and act on future health threats that are caused by completely new emerging pathogens. And this year, I collected interview data with mainly the same experts. And now my aim is to understand how the COVID-19 experiences have possibly affected the preparedness-related principles and practices and the perceptions of the next pandemic. And so I did participant observation in THL for 7 months before the COVID, but for ethical reasons, I did not do this during the pandemic. And I have 2 sets of semi-structured expert interviews, in total 24 interviews, 14 from before the pandemic and 10 during the pandemic, with the same set of questions. And of course, I have analyzed some of the national level documents. But a tiny bit about the context first. For a few decades now, there have been global efforts to counter something called emerging infectious diseases, so new pathogens which might cause border-crossing epidemics. And following this trend, also the Finnish experts see that pandemics are inevitable in a globalized world and that it would be irresponsible not to prepare for them. So in this way, the understanding of public health has gone beyond the Finnish population's endemic diseases. Now the experts also consider to some extent how this population might be affected by previously unknown health threats. The common risk-based approach to the management of public health is based on knowledge of historical patterns of disease occurrence. And nowadays this coexists with a kind of vigilance against emerging pathogens and with different generic preparedness practices that work without the knowledge of the exact shape of the future pandemic or epidemic. Today, I'll present just 2 clusters of initial observations I have made concerning firstly the prototype thinking and secondly the so-called normal functions. But for those who are interested in a more detailed analysis of pre-COVID pandemic preparedness in Finland, I offer this link to my master's thesis. So let's start with the principle of prototype, which is visible in many countries. Probably all of you have already heard of this. So it means that the experts consider influenza pandemic preparedness to be the prototype for pandemic preparedness. Pandemic preparedness is based on the assumption that the cause of the next pandemic is most likely going to be a new type of influenza virus because they mutate so fast and can spread easily. So the expected unexpected was an influenza pandemic, but also because of its very mutability, it was expected that there will be surprises. For example, the exact variant and the severity of the disease would not be known in advance. And while these assumptions locked in some influenza-specific preparations like stockpiling of antiviral drugs, at the same time, the idea was that preparations against the influenza pandemic would form the basis for being prepared for any other globally spreading health threat. And this is because many of the elements like communication, lines of authority, and so on are the same, no matter what the health threat is. But still, before the COVID-19, about half of the experts also suspected that the influenza pandemic preparedness plan was not flexible enough. For example, expecting influenza makes the preparedness plan quite vaccine-oriented, as one expert is expressing here. There are viruses that we don't have vaccines against. And also I was told that the World Health Organization is promoting, or its pandemic preparedness guides promote something called all hazards approach to health preparedness, meaning that the focus should not be on the specific threats, but on the response capacities. And during the COVID-19, the threat of the next pandemic is as real as before. And preparedness should still be based on the consideration of certain most likely microbes, while at the same time eyes must be kept open for wild cards and disease X. But probabilities will be reconsidered, or the compass will be calibrated, one of them said, when assessing the likelihood of different threats. At the same time, now more experts say that preparedness, and specifically the preparedness plan, should be more generic. And there's a need for a somewhat dynamic plan that can be updated fast. And one approach is to consider a wider range of specific scenarios, I was told, like one with aerosol transmission, since the plan now is actually based on a rather mild pandemic. And this prototype idea will be something interesting to look at when the ministry releases the update of the preparedness plan. As I said, surprises regarding the threat itself were totally expected. At the same time, some of the biggest surprises for the experts seem to be about the nature of the pandemic measures and the effects of the measures in Finland and in other countries. For example, in different countries, uncoordinated reactions were somewhat surprising. And it seems to me that lockdowns, closing borders, mask recommendations, these were not quite expected to be in the toolbox, and therefore the effects of such measures or trade-offs were not fully considered in advance. An expert describes this in the following way. The world went mad and borders were closed. Now we have an example of what can happen at worst to people's movement and freedom. The preparedness plans are going to be revised because now we have seen that it's possible to close down pretty much the whole world. But how acceptable is it anymore? Another cluster of observations is about something the experts call normal functions. And they mean that the management of infectious diseases in its entirety is understood to form the basis for preparedness against new threats. So the better the primary healthcare, diagnostics, epidemic investigation, surveillance, and so on are, the better we are prepared for any threat. At the same time, they say that there needs to be a readiness to intensify or increase the performance of these normal operations when needed during disturbances, and that improvisation is also necessary because the reality always turns out different compared to the plans. So when I was finishing an interview with the question of what's the most important health threat, one expert answered that I would actually look at it from a different angle. We don't know what it will be. So in my opinion, when the normal functions, daily processes are working well, we can react to anything. And one of these normal ongoing practices is something called networks. These were told to be the cornerstone of preparedness against new threats. So these networks include global surveillance of specific diseases or clusters of syndromes, global laboratory networks, and early warning systems for exchanging all this information and situation pictures and risk assessments about new threats. And relying on these networks, THL has the task of constantly staying vigilant because it's the official focal point in Finland for this international exchange of information and biological material. And by far, it seems that during COVID, the drastic scaling up of many of these normal functions was really challenging, especially with limited resources. So the scaling up has a temporal aspect too, like for example, the planned delivery times of viral samples within the country turned out to be too long. And it was challenging to scale up testing, as you all know, especially at the borders. And this high intensity of surveillance and the daily reporting of the cases in the media were perhaps not expected to go on for so long. And THL, which is responsible, for example, for the epidemiological situation picture felt like it had to be the situation room for the whole country, one expert told me, adding that we don't know everything about everything. And some aspects of the international network seem to have worked perhaps too well, especially in the beginning. Like there was so much information available that THL needed more people than normally just to keep up with the messages and to attend all the meetings. As one of them is expressing here, this is lunatic, we might be having 4 meetings at the same time. And I still need to look at this topic further, but I was told that the early warning systems often report about clusters of pneumonia somewhere, even monthly. So it took time to realize that this time it would be different. So at any given time, there are many signals to look at when trying to be vigilant, but still recognizing a significant event might be challenging. However, in Finland, it's more about observing observations that have already been made somewhere else and then deciding how to react to those and when and how to communicate about it. But here it's also clear that assumptions were made based on the past. In the beginning, it was assumed that this new epidemic would be contained in China. And with more time, I could have also talked about multisectorality, multidisciplinarity of pandemic preparedness, as those are crucial issues, I think. And as I said, the biggest surprises were perhaps not about the new pathogen itself, but more about the political, social, behavioral, and legal aspects of the pandemic. And this also relates to the challenges and consequences of framing. If pandemics are strictly framed as health threats and preparedness is only biomedically focused, this might leave out some important areas that should be considered when building preparedness. But by definition, preparedness is something where the focus is not so much on the specific threat and more on its effects and the response capacity. So of course, preparedness alone is not enough if the root causes of threats are never addressed. And this is what some of the experts also emphasize in Finland. While there were generic preparedness practices in place before the pandemic, like the prototype preparedness plan, simulation exercises, civilians, and so on, it seems that there is a sentiment now that this was in many ways not enough, and that too many assumptions were perhaps made about the form of the next pandemic. But at the same time, I don't see any sort of great questioning of the general principles of preparedness, like there needs to be better cross-sectoral coordination still, and the normal functions are still the basis for preparedness. Improvisation will always be necessary, and constant surveillance is still essential, and so on. Now my time is up, so I thank you. Thank you everyone for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Helmi. It was wonderful, wonderful presentation, like the 2 previous ones as well. But I think we were really fascinated about your highly topical topic, if I may say it that way. Do we have some questions now? Everybody has presented, so we can use the remaining time, 6 or 7 minutes more or less, for free questions. But I would like to start with Helmi, if somebody has something that popped to mind. So Paula, please.
Thanks, and sorry I couldn't find the raise hand function for some reason. This was really interesting. One of the, I mean, it raises a lot of questions, but one of the interesting one is how do you, because I think in the media, if one follows it not as an academic but just as a normal citizen, I feel like there's kind of this, is THL representing science or policy or politics? Because I can kind of detect both. And how in your study how did the people in the THL, or how did you interpret their role as a scientific or policy organization, or the kind of dual roles involved?
Yeah, this is one really interesting topic, this expert and politician division. I think the narrative is that there is like we are the experts and we don't have too much to do with with the politician on the decision-making side, but also I have somewhat distorted data on this at the moment because I could not get interviews from the top experts who have been most in contact with the political side. So this is one issue too. But I think generally, if I compare the pre-pandemic and the later material that I've collected, the science policy interface as a topic did not come up so much. It did occasionally, but now it's really discussed more. And I'm thinking, like, was this aspect not considered properly before the pandemic? I don't know.
Okay, Matti, I see you have a hand up, so you can turn on the mic and ask directly. I believe it's easiest.
Yeah, thanks for the very interesting presentation. You mentioned the pandemic preparedness and prevention and the multidisciplinary pandemic preparedness. Could you elaborate just a little bit on what did this concretely mean to the interviewees? What would a multidisciplinary pandemic preparedness look like?
Well, like before the pandemic, there were increasing efforts to prepare in a multi-sectoral way. Maybe it was more about the multi-sectoral than multidisciplinary way, I could say. But like there's this One Health approach, and also the preparedness plan is covering briefly. This was mentioned before the pandemic, that it covers other sectors and the effects of the pandemic for other sectors. But and there was this one extensive multi-sectoral health security evaluation done and some cooperative exercises. So in these kind of ways, the preparedness would be multi-sectoral. But still, before the COVID, I could already see that it seemed to me that most of the suspected cases of new threats like anthrax letters and so on, the SARS, they always extended the field of cooperation beyond what they had thought that would be needed. So each time it was a surprise, and the COVID has been the biggest surprise in this respect, I would say. Like, it's just so extensive, like the effects of the pandemic is covering all the sectors. So it's clearly, again, obvious for them that that preparedness should be also multi-sectoral. Yeah.
So who's in charge of developing that? Is it are they doing it, or is it the Ministry of Health, or whose job is it?
The ministry, but of course the experts also experts from DHL are also taking part.
Okay. Do we have questions to any other? I think there is something coming in chat. Is it Sampo? Can you maybe turn on the mic and ask directly, because the chat questions will not so easily get to the recorded version. So I think it's a follow-up question to Markus.
Yes, I can elaborate it a bit. First, I asked Markus about this, why the spruce itself also is somewhat safe from pest in mixed forest. And that was replied by the pest preferences. I was interested to have a follow-up question about the population dynamics, maybe on these pests, that whether they are predators preying the pest insects. So is there also something in the mixed forest that there are different kinds of other insects or other animals preying on those, or because I've sometimes heard about this, but you're the expert, so I'm wanting to ask if you could elaborate if there's some multi-species dynamics there.
Yes, that is a good question, and I left it out of my slides intentionally because the time was so short. But yeah, so the main predators of the spruce bark beetle, there is the ant beetle, Thanasimus formicarius or muurahaiskuoriainen, and then there are many parasitoid wasps, Loispistiaisia. And in Finland, those guys have a very big role in holding down the general level of bark beetles. I've had many brilliant yet unsuccessful funding applications about the topic because we know that some of those predators are using dead wood for their own breeding and for their own living. So then there is a good question that if you have a forest with a diverse structure, with a diverse dead wood structure, would you have more predators and would they help you in controlling the beetle epidemics? So in theory, yes, absolutely yes, it works like that. But we haven't tested it in real life yet. Our plan was to put traps of million types to different types of forest and see what is the baseline of the predators and what is the baseline of the pest insects like the bark beetles. There is a strong theory for this that if you have more diverse forest, you will have more predators and more other beetles for the competition. So it should work like that. We are yet to do good field tests, but hopefully my future applications will be more successful than the previous ones.
Let's truly hope so. I have a bad news that the formal 60-minute recording time is over, so we will stop the formal seminar a bit abruptly, but this is the agreement. But I think it's still possible to stay in the room for another half an hour or so if you have follow-up questions or discussions or anything informal. So this will not be recorded as said. But on behalf of all organizers, thanks everybody joining us in 2021. This is the last session and see you next year.